The Emerald Prince, written by Whimsical Girl 357 and read to you by Lay Cactus Queen. Notes: if you don't know anything about the past of Hawks, Dobby, or Kirigiri, read at your own risk. This book is sort of 50-50 OP Deku and Deku Bowl. Considering the painful cliches I'm about to bring out in just the next 3 chapters, I would ask that those of you dithering over whether this book is for you or not to hold out until at least chapter 4, even better chapter 7, which properly sets the mood of this book and how I'm writing Izuku. Fair enough if you don't like the book, but if you're debating. Summary: Aizawa watched Izuku drink his black coffee, gazing absently out the window. The underground hero couldn't help but smirk. He looked forward to the effect beautiful, powerful, sassy Izuku would have on a pack of hormonal teenage hero wannabes. Chapter 1: Out in the Cold. Izuku wasn't having a particularly good day. He'll admit it to anyone, though no one would ask. The last day of term was supposed to be the best, but ideals and reality don't always get along, a lesson that had been taught to him in more ways than he could count, or at least be bothered to now. The day had started out with the usual harassment and teacher negligence, the burns and degradation that had become almost background noise to him, his ability to care gradually fading with his other emotions. In order to cope with the shit he was dealing with, his brain had found no other solution. He grimaced on his walk back to the house he was allowed to live in as his shirt chafed against his newest burns. There were 3 main reasons Izuku never fought back against Bakugo's abuse. The first, that in targeting him, everyone else got relative peace, even if he would never be thanked. It neatly negated Bakugo's insistence that he was useless. The second, he understood Bakugo. The guy had many faults, but his quirk was the main cause of his short temper and violent nature, along with how, due to his mother's similar temperament, his home life wasn't easy. Not bad, but not as good as it could be either. The third reason was that he knew, beneath the abuse, this probably started out as Bakugo in his own way trying to discourage Izuku from being a hero to try to keep him safe, though perhaps, he thought, that really is wishful thinking. Today, Bakugo had crossed a new boundary, telling him to kill himself. He had considered it, and often too, but it was a first in being told to do so, so it really wasn't a great day. No matter how little he really blamed Bakugo, being assured that you are useless and worthless both at home and at school wasn't exactly a joy for Izuku either, and this was a new low. Izuku reached the house where he lived and unlocked the door to find the place empty. Empty of pictures, empty of all furniture, empty of food, and empty of single abusive parents. There was a note on the tiled floor of the once kitchen Inko had thoughtfully left behind. I will no longer take the embarrassment of being your mother. I am leaving to join my husband, and I expect never to hear from you, piece of trash, or the police. So don't you dare commit suicide or look for me. Rent on the house runs out in a month. Izuku brushed his thumb over the words, barely an indent. She hadn't been even faintly emotional when writing this. She hadn't signed it either. Embarrassment. She was gone, and this wasn't even the end of junior high. He still had another year. Izuku glanced over the note once more, then discarded it. Breathe. He went down to look in the cellar he'd been sleeping in for the last 10 years, and was pleasantly surprised to find his few possessions untouched and tattered computer still present in the hidden grate. He was genuinely relieved. He didn't face going in yet, though. He headed upstairs to the bedroom, catching his reflection in the mirror that had surprisingly been left behind, unlike the bed. Those big dull green eyes stared back at him. He vaguely wondered how long it had been since there was light in them. He sat on the floor to think. So he was living alone now, and he was not to commit suicide. He could work with that. If he was honest with himself, this situation was a substantial upgrade other than his impending homelessness. The carpet of the empty bedroom would make for much more comfort than the concrete of the cellar, and he wouldn't need to steal first aid supplies from the school nurse anymore. But he had to consider his future. Obviously, he'd be going to high school. He was pretty smart if he said so himself, so it was worthwhile. Even if right now he was in no mood to play by the rules, he had a long life ahead of him. Views and values change, and qualifications would give him choices, so high school it was. He shifted from cross-legged to lying on his side, his next thought making the tug of gravity no longer resistible. UA was pointless. Though it still hurt a little to admit, he clearly wasn't getting a quirk, and even if he did, the probability of it actually being conductive to hero work was pretty slim. But as a quirkless person, he'd have to be academically excellent if he had a hope of doing well in life. Why even bother living? Izuku dug his nails into the flesh of his forearm. The pain repelled the unhelpful thoughts for now. Breathe. He could drop out of junior high. He'd learned all of next year's syllabus anyway. Savings were more urgent. He could arrange to take all the tests in the first week back, though that meant only 2 weeks to revise. Anyway, he would be dealing with high school, which meant jobs had to be weekend or evenings, preferably very well paid per hour. He rolled onto his stomach, wincing as last night's cuts and today's bruises made themselves known again, and hauled himself to his feet to look in the mirror once more. Disregarding the heavy eye bags, signs of malnourishment, and fading bruises, he didn't look too awful. With a bit of time to clean himself up and heal, he could do it. He hunched over and folded in his shoulders at school to go under the radar more, but if he stretched out properly, he was attractive for his age, pretty feminine too. He noticed a few girls and guys had started looking at him differently at school. One even spoke to him once. To do that in spite of Bakugo meant he must be relatively good looking. He allowed himself a rare smile. A hairstyle change and he'd look perfect for that kind of work. He was over the age of consent in Japan after all. He wondered what Bakugo would think, then cast the unnecessary thought away. He looked away from the mirror and returned to the cellar, crawling on hands and knees due to the low ceiling and trying not to have a panic attack at the closeness of the walls. Those All Might posters went with his rights to having an actual bedroom. They'd pissed her off, but he removed the last of the figurines he'd hidden to throw away, and though he did hesitate, his hero analysis books. He reassured that small remaining part of him that still cared that he had them memorized anyway. He also went through his clothes, but put the ones he didn't want in Inko's old room just in case, not like he had the money to really be chucking anything. He escaped the confines of the cellar with relief, hopefully never to return, and left the house, chucking the figurines in the bins outside. He was about to follow suit with the books, but hesitated. She hadn't mentioned paying the heating or electricity bills after all. If he needed warmth, he would need tinder. It would be kind of poetic, really, burning his dreams for the sake of keeping warm. He came back in, dumping them in the living room before opening and starting up his ancient computer. He set up a bank account. He didn't have any money, not like he'd been allowed to work or got some for birthdays. Anything for birthdays, actually. When was his birthday? He realized with surprise he didn't remember anymore. Breathe. Not like it really mattered. He wouldn't be able to afford food for a while, but it wasn't like he'd been living off much more than a meal every 2 days anyway. A new problem suddenly dawned on him. If he did that type of work, he couldn't be bruised and battered from bullying, so he needed to work out and learn self-defense in time to stop that cycle in high school. It was going to be a very busy year. Izuku closed his laptop. He transitioned everything he'd removed from the glorified hole in the ground up to the empty bedroom and settled on the carpet. Then he curled in on himself and cried. Hey everyone, it's Lay Cactus Queen here, obviously. I know this isn't the usual type of content I make, but I really wanted to try doing this because I really want to get into like voice acting and stuff. So I thought I'd give it a go. Please let me know what you think, and any constructive criticism is very much welcome. But I think this is what I'm gonna start with. This fic, obviously. But if you have any suggestions, let me know and I will check them out. Bye.